Well, hello and welcome back to the Lamppost Listener. My name is Daniel.
I'm Phil.
And this is a podcast where we journey chapter by chapter through C.S. Lewis's Chronicles of Narnia. This is chapter 9 of The Horse and His Boy, Across the Desert.
I was going to make that joke.
I know. I thought you were going to make some kind of joke there about desert and dessert, so I have...
You've preempted me.
Now we have no joke to start the show with. And you want to just do the whole intro again? Would that be better for everybody?
Would that be a redo?
Well, hello and welcome. No. Welcome back, Phil.
Thanks. It's good to be here.
We've got an interesting chapter to talk about today in The Horse and His Boy. It's
the phrase "arduous journey" comes to mind.
Yeah, I had that one in there.
I peeked at that from your summary, but it's true. It's almost like a Tolkien chapter.
How so?
Well, instead of like walking through the forest forever, they're walking through the desert forever, and it's a lot.
I get that. I can't think of a chapter though in the Lord of the Rings, for instance, that is this travel heavy with no other kind of acts of substance occurring. For instance, there are a lot of obviously journey heavy things, but usually there's more adventures or like challenges along the way, where this one's just walking, you know.
Well, I do think that the challenge for them is the fact that nothing happens. They start playing games with themselves, to get past the boredom and the heat and the sweat,
and that is the atmosphere that Lewis portrays in this chapter. It is it's not like boring in that this is boring to read, but it feels monotonous. And as I was rereading it to prepare for us to record here at this exact moment, I was like, wow, this is it feels way longer than it is. But then when I was writing my chapter summary, I was like, nothing really happens. Not that it's a bad chapter at all, but it is very much a transitional chapter.
Right. And maybe that's the point too. Maybe we're supposed to feel how long and boring this journey is.
Yeah.
And the chapter is not boring. The chapter is actually quite fun to read. But it's going to be interesting to talk about this
C.S.
chapter.
Lewis can't hear you if you want to admit that you were bored.
We don't know that he can't hear us.
No, it was still a good chapter. But before we jump into the chapter, I actually wanted to go back to the last chapter, which was, we really didn't hear at all from Aravis and Lazareline in the last chapter because they were hiding behind that couch, right? And we mostly heard from Rabadash, and help me out with some of the other names here. We had the Vizier and the Tisroc.
That's right.
Right. And
God, I could help.
I was going back. I was reading a little bit of Unlocking the Wardrobe by Paul Karkanen. We've gone to him many times, and he pointed out something really interesting about the last chapter that I did not really pick on in this conversation between these three Calormens. And I wanted to read just a little bit from the chapter he has on the horse and his boy. So listen to this as we think about the conversation between those three men from chapter 8. He writes, Rabadash shows the hypocrisy behind all of the elevated expressions used by the Calormens. Lewis informs the reader that the prince says, "O my father, and oh the delight of my eyes," very quickly and sulkily, and this is now Lewis talking, very quickly and sulkily, and not as all as if the Tisroc were the delight of his eyes. Now this is back to Paul Karkanen talking. He says, this hypocrisy becomes even more plain when he says that the High King Peter of Narnia will want his nephew and grandnephew on the throne of Calormen and, therefore, will not oppose Rabadash's marriage to Susan. This, of course, is contrary to the ridiculous desire, as stated by all Calormens, for the Tisroc to live forever. Not only does the prince show that he does not believe Calormen truisms, he also demonstrates that he is tired of having the poets quoted to him by kicking the chief quoter, Ahoshta, who's the vizier, the would-be fiancé of Aravis. Finally, Rabadash seals his own doom by proposing a dash across the desert to Archenland and Narnia. Now, some people might say, oh my goodness, Daniel has spoiled himself by knowing that Rabadash has sealed his own doom, but I'm being 5 books into Narnia, I did not think that he was going to succeed, so that's not a real spoiler. That's me realizing, oh man, Rabadash is going to fail in his attempt to kill Peter and to win Susan back.
Here we know, based on the line, the witch and the wardrobe are fine.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, what do you think of Paul Karkanen's kind of thoughts here?
That's a great point. I love how we have very concrete evidence of the hypocrisy. and just examples of that.
He did such a great job. I mean, obviously, those three characters from the last chapter are not meant to be likable. They're somewhat comical, but they're mostly despicable, people. And I love the way that this little text here that I just read shows us just the hypocrisy inherent in even just the way they're speaking. Mm-hmm. Like their actions do not line up with the words coming out of their mouths, and it's apparent even in their own interactions with one another. What I am intrigued to find out as we go further into this book, and obviously we see more of, at least I know we'll see Rapidash again, is do these characters recognize their own hypocrisy? For instance, does Rapidash know that he's, not really following what he's saying himself? Is he aware of that, or does he really just not care at all? Obviously, he doesn't really want his father to live forever because he's like, hey, well, Peter will let me do this because he wants his own niece and nephew to be on the throne one day. So he obviously does want to be king himself, or Tizrock himself, but does he recognize that his logic isn't that great with what he's saying then?
Yeah, to me it seems that they're doing the bare minimum that's required. You're required to say these things, but they're saying it as unmeaningful as possible.
Yeah, sure.
They don't actually want that.
So then with this kind of this religious, or I guess let's call it religious element of the Calormens, are we to take it that the rest of the Calormens are this hypocritical in their own beliefs? Like when Lazareline says, may he live forever, speaking of the Tizrock, does she mean it? Does a commoner on the street, do one of the servants or slaves mean it when they have to say it? Or is this just kind of this, what we often see in maybe a large kind of power structure where the people on top are just playing everyone else, and you do have devout people further down the totem pole, if you will? Or is this kind of across the board, as Lewis has been telling us about the Calormens? Are we to take it that all of them are really, it's just kind of the trappings of this religious or societal structure that really no one's believing, but they all kind of still just hold it up?
We have no indication that anyone actually wants that. No one wants the Tizrock to live forever. It seems like he's not great, and I doubt anyone actually means that. But it seems like everyone says it kind of out of a, like, we've always done this, we have to say this.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah. I think I'm going to take the other side in that I feel like it's one of the things where the people who hold power in this society are very much just, like the Tizrock, it's very clear. It's just playing everybody. But I do think that if you were to go around just through the market of Tashbaan, you might find people who are devout. What's the name of their god? I forgot already. But and maybe we might actually find out about their god later. I can't remember if he's been mentioned in this book or not. So I will not spoil you, Phil. But don't Google it. I see you typing over there. Don't do that. No, you're just looking up memes from SpongeBob. Come on, man. Really? We're recording right now.
I don't know. I kind of felt like I earned the right to phone it in once in a while.
What's that episode of The Office where this is not a fun way to podcast, but I've already started it, so I'm going to do it. Where Michael is like on vacation. It's in season 3, and Dwight records all of their meetings, and Jim kind of is like, Dwight is wearing a baby's bonnet, and then Andy ruins it by being like,
I am now cutting off Phyllis's head with a chainsaw.
There's always that one person like, all right, it was a funny joke, and then you've completely taken it to the extreme, and now it's ruined.
That's what they did so well with his character, is that
until the last few seasons when they completely butchered that character.
Let's focus on seasons 3 through 6. But
no, I even think in 7 he's pretty good. Okay. Michael's last season, especially the one where they have Andy's play with oh my gosh. One of my favorite later episodes.
Daryl's line at the beginning of that play.
You're gonna be quiet because what is it?
If we don't pay attention to the overture, then we won't recognize the musical themes throughout the rest of the performance. So good.
That's so funny. That's my favorite episode in the 7th season. It's one of the last really great episodes of that show. But yeah, I don't even remember what are we talking about Narnia?
And Aaron asking Andy, she's like, "Did you write this?" And he's seeing the demon Barbara Seville. But so we were talking about memes there. Sorry, I was making my silly joke. But I do think that further
down kind of in this hierarchy, I think you would find more people who really, when they say may the Tizrock live forever, actually do mean it. I think there's people, it doesn't mean that their actions are justified, because we still see some awful things happening throughout all of Calorman culture, but I do think that the hypocrisy is much stronger on those higher levels of this social structure than they are further down.
Yeah. In the interest of being more precise, I think that the people at the top are probably definitely abusing it.
Mm-hmm.
And the people below, I think that they don't believe it, but they may not be aware that they don't actually believe it. They've never really thought about it. And it doesn't really matter to them.
And that's not to say that it's an excuse. Like Arshish, Aravis's adopted father, is there's just this fisherman who obviously doesn't have a lot of money. He'd be very far down, if we want to think about it like that, in the societal structure, and yet he's still a horrible person. Like, don't get me wrong. It's not like, everyone, the further you get from the top, we're kind of forgiving these people, we're not forgiving, but we are excusing these actions. We're not, and I don't think we're supposed to as readers, but I do think that someone like Arshish might really mean those things. I think it actually might be sincere for him, as he's like even treating his supposed son poorly. He still might think that everything's okay because I want the Tizrock to live forever and all those things. I don't think it's as hypocritical. I mean, there is still a hypocrisy in his own treatment he's a pretty terrible father, obviously, but I think he believes it, know?
Yeah.
But I think, okay, so that's enough of last chapter. We should jump into chapter 9 here and talk about this long journey. It is an odd chapter, which means I have a very short chapter summary here. I think it was about 80 some words, so only about just a little more than half of what I'm allowed to do.
Would you like to carry over any remaining words?
No, I'm
chapter
fine.
11 when you do that? Okay.
I'm just fine.
All right.
All right, here we go. Aravis escapes from the Tizrock's palace and reunites with Bree, Hwin, and Shasta outside of Tashban. Aravis shares the plans of Prince Rabadash, and the company heads north towards Narnia. The arduous journey challenges the horses, but they eventually make it to a resting spot among an oasis with running water. All 4 travelers accidentally, but not surprisingly, fall asleep by the water. After waking, they set off at a much slower pace, in large part due to Bree's lack of urgency.
Well done. I love the contrast of the arduous journey, the fact that they fall asleep, and then that they continue at a slower pace, almost like they're drowsy as they move on.
Yeah, it's one of those weird things here, and this happens all the time for us on the show, where this chapter ends, and without being able to go into the next chapter, it's a little tricky to find out why, or at least what's happening. Bree seems to almost have apathy here about the pace. They worked really hard, so they went all night long and then all day. So it's been about 24 hours of travel. And I wonder if after sleeping, Bree is just exhausted. Like, look, we've done all the hard work, and so we don't really need to push through as hard as we were before. But it does seem weird because it's like, yeah, but a lot of stuff depends on this. Yeah, you have a lead, but why would you give it up? Like, just keep going just as hard. And maybe it just is exhaustion. Maybe it's something else. I don't know.
Maybe it's a plot device.
That may be. Well, I guess we'll talk about that more at the end of the chapter. We're not quite there yet, but that is something that I thought was interesting here at the end. But let's go back to the House of the Tizrock, where we find Aravis and Lazareline pretty quickly escaping and saying their goodbyes. What happens here as we pick up at the beginning of this chapter?
They go sneaking.
They do. That's weird the way you said it, but we're going to keep it in.
Learned it from you.
That's not true.
That's true.
When?
Anytime we watch The Fellowship of the Ring through The Return of the King, you do your Gollum impersonation.
Oh, that was the Gollum thing. I didn't know that was Gollum.
Sneaky.
It's like sneaky.
Yeah, that's way better. That's what I'm talking about.
When does he say that? What? Oh yeah, when Sam's like, "What were you doing?"
He accuses him of sneaking, and he insists that he wasn't. And he goes, "Well, then what were you doing?" Sneaky.
That is pretty funny. But no. So that's why you said it that way. That's fine. I didn't pick up on it at first.
Okay. So my Gollum's not as good as yours.
Yeah, not to insult your Gollum. I'm sorry.
Whatever.
But they do. They sneak out, and it's it's a pretty quick thing, but there are some interesting dynamics here. Really, just one interesting dynamic between Aravis and Lazareline in that
She doesn't get it. Lazareline doesn't understand why Aravis still wants to leave, even after listening to that whole conversation.
No. Let me defend Lazareline here because I still am of the mind that what she is doing is still very brave. If Lazareline is caught here, there's no way this ends well for her. She is risking everything to help Aravis out, and she does not have to. So I almost think the fact that she doesn't understand the importance of this mission shows how much she cares about Aravis. There's no, I mean, I can't logically come to another conclusion as to why she would risk all of this for Aravis if she didn't believe in any of it. She just likes sneaking around houses, I guess. I don't think that's it. I think she legitimately cares about Aravis. It even says later on that they have this kind of this loving embrace as they depart. So I do, again, Lazareline is not a perfect character by any means, but I do think she's a little bit more complicated, a little bit more round as a Calorman character, in that she's not just this like awful person. She does seem to care about her friend, you know?
Yeah, I think that's true. It's a good point. It's just interesting that she does not seem to understand why Aravis doesn't want to marry this guy even after
and that's fair.
All the stuff.
That's true, because that does come up. And I actually wanted to pull a little bit from Joseph Pierce and his book Further Up and Further In that we've gone to a couple of times. He had a really great just kind of take on this relationship between Aravis and Lazareline, and I think he really uncovers an important part of why Lewis includes this character. I'm just going to read a little bit of a paragraph here that he wrote on his chapter in The Horse and His Boy. And like always, with the books that we mentioned, we will have links to them in the description. I always recommend checking them out. You can either find them maybe at your library or go purchase them. They're really great scholars who know a lot more than we do.
Yeah.
Here's what he writes as he talks about just the conversations that Aravis and Lazareline have. He writes, "In this exchange, we catch a glimpse of something primal, something so fundamental that it defines our very relationship with ourselves, our neighbors, and our God. It is the choice we are all called to make between heaven and hell, between the sacred and the profane, between the things of this world and the things of the world to come, or, to use the language of the Bible, the choice between God and mammon. No man can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will sustain the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon." And that's from the Gospel of St. Matthew. He then writes this: "Lazareline has chosen to serve mammon. She puts her own comfort before all else and has been corrupted into a life of decadence by the selfish choices she has made." I think that's a really, really great way to contrast these two characters. Lazareline, again, is not a perfect character. In fact, at the end of the day, she still chooses, like using the words he uses, a life of decadence over the right thing, right? She has heard this. You're right, Phil. She's heard this plan, knows that it's wrong, or at least should know that it's wrong, and does say she'll help Aravis out. She'll go that far, but she's not going to go with Aravis.
She also, Lazareline says, it must be right if he's going to do it, meaning the Tisroc. So she's using him as the...
Okay, but this goes back to what we were just saying. Do you think she believes that, or is it a crutch?
I feel like what we're seeing is her belief in that slowly unraveling. It just hasn't fully done that.
Yeah, I agree. Yet. I think there is some...
there's a reason she's saying it out loud, and then like when she hears it out loud, then she's starting to change.
I think in some way, I know this sounds very like... It's a very like postmodern way to put it, but there is starting to be a little bit of deconstruction here of some of her ideas. In that, okay, well, he said it was right, but now I'm maybe questioning if it is right. But if I believe that everything he says is right, and now I'm thinking this might be wrong, what does that mean about my own fundamental beliefs about this world? And we're starting to see that unravel. But there's also that she enjoys this life. I think if we were to revisit Lazareline, I assume, by the way, that we're not going to see this character again. So if we do, then I guess all this is for nothing. But I would assume that if we were to revisit Lazareline years from now, she would still be living the same life. And even if she kind of had these ideas fall apart in her head, she enjoys the beauty and the riches and honestly the selfishness of her life that she would not be willing to give that up. Even if she goes, yeah, I don't really believe this stuff anymore, or even recognize that some of these things are wrong. I do think she still is selfish enough that she wouldn't necessarily, hurt people like Aravis who are disagreeing with her, but she wouldn't join them because she has a great position in this form of government and this society through these systems of belief.
Yeah.
But I thought Joseph Pierce did a great job pointing out what Aravis is choosing here, which is to leave. She's pushing and she said that, remember 2 chapters ago when Lazareline was trying to just understand, wait, why are you saying no to all these things? Your fiance is going to be really rich. He's going to be powerful. And she's like, I don't care about those things. She even says, you're forgetting when I go to Narnia, I'm going to be a nobody. And she doesn't care because she knows that it's right. So it's really interesting. And I love the way that Pierce looks at the words of Matthew in his gospel, saying, look, you cannot serve two things. You've got to choose. You've got to choose. It's a really wise it's a really wise connection that Pierce has made there.
Right. And it's such a beautiful parting too. Aravis says, goodbye. I thought your dress is lovely, and I think your house is lovely too. And she's acknowledging all those things. But then she says, I'm sure you'll have a lovely life, though it wouldn't suit me. Close the door softly behind me. And just that finality, like the closing the door part, makes it even better.
This is Aravis's like full renunciation of her life and her Calorman identity in the status that she has as a Tarkina, right? Like she could stay in that city, and I'm sure she could she's smart enough to be able to maneuver her way around. Oh, I didn't run away. Something happened. Someone kidnapped me. Maybe that Shasta guy kidnapped me. She could stay, and everything would be okay for her. But she chooses not to. And I think the parting here between these two young girls is so interesting because it's not one of malice. It's one of two girls who disagree, and we can objectively say one is right and one is wrong, but it's not hateful as they leave, and it's not antagonistic. It's this, look, your life seems like it will be lovely from your perspective, and I wish you the best. It's really interesting.
Yeah. And in a way, even though that she says, close the door softly behind me, I think that there is a possibility for them to reconnect later because they are leaving things in that way. There's not that tension. It's not a blow up and we leave each other like furious at each other.
But yeah, moving on, they say goodbye, they move on, we leave the city once and for all, and pretty quickly she just reunites with everybody. Like there's a little bit of a anticlimactic here that she's like, oh, I see the horses. She tells the guy with the horses, like, hey, go back. You're not supposed to be here. He has to listen to her because she's a Tarkina. Mm-hmm. And then Shasta just runs out from behind the tombs. Like, hey, guys. Then the separation that has occurred since what? The beginning of chapter 4? Here through 5 chapters later is just like, no, they're back together now.
Yeah. Which is kind of nice because we did have a whole chapter of them hiding behind a couch trying to get out.
Yeah.
And then this kind of difficult parting. It's nice that she gets on the boat, makes it to the shore. Yeah. And then immediately finds the road and then finds them.
Yeah, just gets right back with them.
Boom, boom,
there
boom.
You go. Yeah. She does share the plan of Prince Rabadash, and the horses especially are really disgusted at this plan because it's a time of peace, and Rabadash is going against that. But it's time to move on. They pretty quickly, Bree is mounted by Shasta, and Aravis gets on Hwen, and they take off. They take off for the north across the desert, and they begin at nighttime. And I'd actually would like to read a little bit of Lewis's prose here as this journey begins. At first it was delightful. The night had now been going on for so many hours that the sand had almost finished giving back all the sun heat it had received during the day, and the air was cool, fresh, and clear. Under the moonlight, the sand in every direction and as far as they could see gleamed as if it were smooth water or a great silver tray. Except for the noise of Bree's and Hwen's hoofs, there was not a sound to be heard. Shasta would nearly have fallen asleep if he had not had to dismount and walk every now and then. This seemed to last for hours. Then there came a time when there was no longer any moon. They seemed to ride in the dead darkness for hours and hours. And after that, there came a moment where Shasta noticed that he could see Bree's neck and head in front of him a little more clearly than before. And slowly, very slowly, he began to notice the vast gray flatness on every side. It looked absolutely dead, like something in a dead world, and Shasta felt quite terribly tired and noticed that he was getting cold and that his lips were dry. So all this is happening in this first part of the journey, as Lewis describes the evening and then into the very, very beginning of the sunrise, which is just beautiful.
He sure does paint a picture, doesn't he?
Yeah, it's really great. And like I said, we start to you can understand how monotonous this journey would be. It doesn't start that way. It's beautiful here at first, but that's because the sun hasn't come up yet in the desert, right?
Yep.
It's still a relatively enjoyable journey. But Phil, what happens once that sun does come up?
Well, they do keep journeying on for a much longer time, but because it gets so hot, it becomes much more difficult. So it's fine for the horses, but every time Shasta tries to jump off and walk on the sand, he can't because now it's scorching his feet.
Yeah, and Aravis has shoes. I guess, has Shasta just not had shoes
I think
this
he
whole
just
time?
doesn't have shoes.
Has that come up before? Have we known that he doesn't have shoes on? I don't know.
Maybe
I guess
he
I
left
haven't,
in a
looked, I
hurry.
haven't looked at his feet in any of the pictures, but he has a really hard time with this because it's burning his feet. And Shasta's a little frustrated with Aravis because she has shoes on. But this continues for a long period of time, and I don't know if there's much for us to unpack other than just to acknowledge the beauty of Lewis's words here.
We do get a nice little narrator moment here where Shasta says, "It's all right for you. You've got shoes on." And then Aravis doesn't say anything, but looked prim. And the narrator says, "Let's hope she didn't mean to, but she did."
I like that. That was a fun thing.
And I think that's part of her changing too.
Yeah.
So we're seeing glimpses of her past self coming up every now and then in these kind of tense
He's like, of course I have
moments.
shoes. You look at you.
Yeah.
I'm a Tarkina. You're
Right.
not. You know.
But she didn't say anything. She
didn't
could
say
have said
anything,
something.
but she's thinking it.
She would
you
have
know?
said something several chapters ago, but now she's not.
Yeah. So this continues until they start meeting some vegetation. The terrain slopes slightly downwards, and what do they come across, Phil?
Luckily, they see some water.
Yeah, they come across water and a beautiful
And
illustration.
It's actually water.
Yeah.
Not a mirage.
No, it's not. And there's this beautiful illustration by Baines, who is actually, we've got a great listener email. We're going to talk about some illustrations later. But Baines does a really great job with this illustration as you see these kind of tall cliffs come up along the sides of our four characters here as they find some running water. And
it's starting to cool off. The moon's come out. It seems like that would provide shade on both sides anyway, but there's plenty of water. They're in a mountainous area now.
Yeah.
Everything's starting to look up.
And it's eventually, it becomes dark outside, and Bree and Twin both acknowledge, hey, we can't go to sleep. And that's all four of them do. They all go to sleep. That's exactly what happens.
Real Garden of Gethsemane.
Exactly. Oh, I wasn't even thinking about that. Interesting.
Just anytime you're trying not to go to sleep.
Are you
So
in? We were actually talking about this in the green room. I don't know why I said it like that. That sounded weird. I just meant I was mostly just being facetious.
Can I ask you a question about the green room?
Yeah.
I always thought that's where they were doing the special effect shots, but that's not the case. That's
Green
like
room
where
is
you're
you get
waiting
ready
to go
before
Okay.
you're recording or on air or something like that. So that's,
This is the problem with all of your content starting post Star Wars, where they were like using a lot of green screens.
okay.
and
Yeah.
stuff.
No, when I mean green screen, I mean we just hadn't hit record yet. We were sitting in the exact same place talking. There usually is. I don't know. Maybe people would want to hear it. I don't think anybody would. But there's usually about an hour of you and I just hanging out in front of the microphones without hitting record.
We do our voice warm up exercises.
yeah.
There's a little bit of yodeling
Mommy
at
made
times.
me mash my M&Ms. We actually spent an hour talking about Spider-Man.
We did.
Not an hour, but like 45 minutes.
Right.
talking
15
about-
minutes on each of the trilogy. This is like the original.
Excuse me, there is only one trilogy in the Spider-Man ethos. No, because the Amazing Spider-Man's 2. There's only 2 movies. And then the MCU stuff, the third one hasn't come out yet. So there's 2.
Okay.
Not
It's
a trilogy.
going to be
Yet.
3 very soon.
I'm sure there's also going to be the Miles Morales Spider-Man will also get a trilogy too eventually, but
That'd be
that
nice.
doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Raimi and Maguire and Kirsten Dunst, the only people that have a trilogy so far, right? J. Jonah Jameson there. What's his name? J.K. Simmons? Yeah. Although I guess he's in the new one too. So
He is.
spoiler alert for a movie that came out like 3 years ago. I do want to go on record as Tobey Maguire is the definitive Spider-Man, and that is Spider-Man 2 is the best superhero movie ever made.
Well, write in if you disagree with him, folks. I just spent an hour talking about this, and I'm not going to do
Yeah,
it right
feels
now.
like I'm not getting back into this. We already argued about this. Spider-Man 2 is better than any Marvel movie, like MCU movie.
Whoa.
It's not even close. It's so
true.
sincere, and it's not afraid to be melodramatic, and they don't undercut moments of drama or emotion with some quippy one-liner to be like, hey, no, we don't want to fully commit to a beautiful emotion. Aunt May sits there in Spider-Man 2, and she does the whole 5-minute speech of like, there's a hero in all of us, and I like Kevin Feige, but they do not have the guts to slow one of their movies down to commit to something as wholesome and sincere
That was
as
a
that.
different time, man.
I agree. And again, I like the
I
MCU
really
stuff,
think
I'm
that,
not, but
things have changed a lot in the past 10, 15 years, and attention spans are different.
you've always said your favorite Spider-Man movie is The
Nope,
Amazing
I never
Spider-Man
said
2.
any of this. That one was actually pretty tough for me.
Yeah. Not you're not a Jamie Foxx fan. That's your problem.
No, I am a Jamie Foxx fan. That's why I didn't understand why that movie was so bad.
Oh man. What an incredible, besides Dean DeHaan, what an incredible cast that
Isn't that fascinating? I
These-
love a good ensemble cast that bombs. Like, how can you have so many good people and then have it not do as well?
I mean, even Paul Giamatti, he plays the Rhino in like the beginning and ending scene. Remember that part?
Yeah.
And he's a great actor.
Yeah.
He's awful in that movie. In like the 3 minutes of screen time he has, you're like, this is clear. Like, no one did he know they were recording? Was this like the warm up take? And I don't know. It's, man, not a good movie. Really, not a great movie. But yeah, sorry. So we did talk a lot about. We talked about other stuff too. A little bit about our personal lives. We don't really talk much about our personal lives with each other.
It's mainly Spider-Man and superhero
mostly
movies.
Spider-Man, superhero.
Essentially.
We didn't talk any Star Wars, thankfully. So
We did.
we'll save it for the show now. I'm kidding. Let's get back to Narnia here. Take it away, Phil.
So the moon's shining and they fell asleep. And there's something odd here. And without talking about anything in the future chapters, there's just a little bit of tension because they're in a rush. They're trying to beat an army and get there first and warn people that this army's coming.
Yeah.
And they took a really long nap. And then even once they wake up, what happens?
Yeah, this is the part that frustrates me, especially with Bree. Okay, I get taking the nap. I get accidentally falling asleep. They have traveled for almost an entire day. That is, and in the hot sun in the desert.
Mm-hmm.
Perfectly acceptable. Like, I totally understand. It's not, I think I even said it. I think I used the word, it's not surprising in my summary earlier. And so you can't blame them. What I can be frustrated with, though, is Bree's lack of urgency when they awake and the fact that his logic really doesn't hold up here.
Mm-hmm.
So as they're, he's kind of slow moving to start off with, I don't know who it is. It's either Aravis or Shasta's like, yeah, but we got to get there. And he's like, hey. It takes a long time for you to get a whole army. Isn't that where he says it here? He's like, it takes a whole line.
It was actually before, they walk a lot. Yeah.
It was before that. But
he said it takes a lot of time to get 200 people and their horses all up and ready.
But that was, so a day ago, he made this comment. But it's like, well, if that was the case, then why'd you guys start off so quickly? Like, why not maybe take more breaks in the desert? Or what? I mean, I understand. Everything makes sense to me until they get here. And Bree's like, all right, we're just going to chill. We're not going to go super hard anymore. We're not going to. And I wonder, is this just, like I said earlier, I think this is more just to do with him being exhausted than it is with like a lack of motivation. Bree is very clearly throughout this entire book wanted to go back to Narnia, and he cares about the success or the flourishing of Narnia. Mm-hmm. So he doesn't want Narnia to get attacked. That's obvious. He cares a lot about his. I don't know if he's ever mentioned the Pevensies as kings and queens. I don't know if they might not have been kings and queens when he was what's the name of a baby horse? A foal. A foal. No, it's foal. I said it right the first time. Look, I want to go on record. I said it right the first time, and you just corrected me the incorrect
I was
way.
trying to help.
Oh, you're helping me. Like if I tell him the wrong one,
Then
he'll
you'll
be
find
able
the
to
right
say
one.
the right
Yeah.
one. Yeah.
It's a controversial method, but
Well, hey,
effective.
in this little conversation here is a kind of a controversial statement here by the narrator that 1,500 people have highlighted in the Kindle, and I want to read this so we can talk about what either the narrator or Lewis as the narrator or what's happening here. Here's the line. I'm going to read this whole paragraph here. This is after Bree says that I know a little more about campaigns and forced marches and what a horse can stand than you do. Kind of Hwin saying, I think horses can really be pushed harder than we're going now, so we can do this. And he says, no, I know more. And then the narrator writes this. To this, Hwin made no answer, being, like most highly bred mares, a very nervous and gentle person who was easily put down. In reality, she was quite right, and if Bree had had a Tarchon on his back at that moment to make him go on, he would have found that he was good for several hours hard going. Here's the part that's highlighted, and I think we should talk about. One of the worst results of being a slave and being forced to do things is that when there is no one to force you anymore, you find you have almost lost the power of forcing yourself.
Yeah, this is a hard one to read for me too, especially in the context of there are all these kind of things that he's like pulling from other cultures or like thinks he's pulling from other cultures.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not really sure how to deal with this one.
Well, yeah, I was interested as to why it was highlighted so many times. So I copied on my little Kindle here, and I just searched that phrase, and I found some people that took a lot of issue with this, but I'm actually not one of them. I actually think what's being said here again, what the narrator, which might be Lewis's actual words, but it could also be just the narrator, saying that one of the worst results of being a slave is being forced to do. That when no one is there to force you anymore, you find you've almost lost the power of forcing yourself. I think this speaks more to slavery as this means of breaking down someone psychologically. I don't think what he's saying, I could be wrong. I've been wrong before many, many times on this show. I don't think what he's saying is that enslavement takes away someone's intrinsic motivation. I think what he's saying is that slavery, in the fact that at its core takes dignity away from another human being, obviously, that what it does is it breaks down someone psychologically, mentally, to the fact where you're taking away a lot of the ability for intrinsic motivation, not as a character flaw.
Because you took that dignity
because
away.
you've taken the dignity away. Yes, that the fault still lies on the slave holder or the person upholding an oppressive system like slavery, in that what it's doing is it's trying to take away, right? Like in order to be successful in slavery, I know it sounds weird to say it like that, but you have to, right, hopefully break down the people that you were trying to oppress, right? I mean, we see that in slavery and historical slavery, not just here in America, but across the world, that so much of what people who were on the oppressive side of a system like this wanted to do was break down the people they were oppressing so they wouldn't rise up or so they wouldn't recognize the injustice. And so I think that's more of what Lewis is speaking to here, or the narrator is speaking to here, is the fact that Hwin and Bree, even to an extent, have in some ways, by the kind of treatment they have received from the Calormans, it has somewhat taken away some of their dignity, and it's hard to get that back. Not because they've done something wrong, but because of the absolute evil of enslaving someone else, that it's really hard. It's not impossible, but it is hard to restore those elements of humanity or horsemanity to these animals.
Yeah. I think that's a really great way to interpret it. I certainly hope that's the case. And it's one of those things that I imagine that when Lewis wrote this, I think he did mean it that way, but there's some trouble with the way it's phrased, where you've almost lost the power. I think that would have been a little better if he had said that you found that the power of forcing yourself has been taken away.
Yeah,
where it's not like you lost it; it was taken away, it was stolen. But that's one of those things where we're viewing it from a much different time, and
sure.
This is also an issue that we talk about quite a bit.
Yeah, And I think when we go through something like this, and as we've come across with a lot of some of what the narrator or Lewis himself writes in this book, we have to acknowledge that we're reading this as 21st century Americans. And so we could be reading it the way Lewis intended. He could have meant it in a much more negative way, which would be, means for maybe discussing some criticism here of kind of the way this is said. I do think some of the language is at least confusing, and that's why it's kind of open to interpretation. But the fact that so many people have highlighted it says that it's at least stands out to a significant portion of readers of this book. And just by, like I said, Googling, I found a lot of people kind of talking about this line on the internet as well.
Yeah. But to be fair, he does say, but one of the worst results. Mm-hmm. And I think that to him, he probably did mean this in a, like, this is a negative thing.
Yeah.
And it's because people have taken away the dignity.
Yeah, and it's not, obviously, even if you read it in what you and I are doing, which is more charitable towards Lewis, it's not a all-encompassing statement to begin with, because you can think of a long line leading all the way back to ancient history of people or individuals who were enslaved who despite the lack of humanity they were shown from enslavers or oppressors, they still were able to rise up, and they were able to use their strength and had this intrinsic motivation or this desire within them to love and serve and free other people, right? And so, I mean, you can think of a long list of people that don't necessarily fit this, even if you're reading it with this charitable reading that you and I are giving to it now. So it's a little bit, I think, still... It does say one of the worst results, so maybe it's not speaking to every person, but I think that there's still people who even come outside that would be outliers to even a phrase like that.
Yeah, and he also says almost lost the power, so it's not completely gone. Yeah.
But weirdly enough here with this line, there's only about another paragraph or so left in the chapter, and it's just that they start moving again, a lot slower, but they start moving, and then it's over. The chapter's ends.
Yeah, the valley itself, this is the last line. The valley itself with its brown, cool river and grass and moss and wildflowers. And how do you say this one?
Rhododendrons.
Rhododendrons. Was such a pleasant place that it made you want to ride slowly. Mm-hmm. That's a very odd place to end a podcast episode. I think it's totally fine to end a chapter that way. And I think it would be really funny if we were able to talk to C.S. Lewis right now and say, hey, some of your chapters are difficult to do a podcast.
They're not helpful for podcasts. Could you think about writing a more podcast-friendly book?
Bite-sized chapters with a little more action, because some of our summaries are hard to write in.
Yeah. But this is where it ends, and we're left off with chapter 10 next, which is called... I am super excited for this. The Hermit of the Southern March. I had kind of thought we'd met all of the new characters in this story, and I'm excited for a new character to enter into the Chronicles of Narnia, because I have never heard of a Hermit of the Southern March. Legitimately, I have no idea what this is going to be about. I'm hoping it's a brand new character that I do not know at all. But before we get into some listener feedback, I guess it's time for my dilemma here to talk about what happens next. And I got to be honest, this might be my least exciting one for, because I'm really not exactly sure. I've been looking at the chapter titles, which come next, which is we have The Hermit of the Southern March and then The Unwelcome Fellow Traveler. And I don't know where this is going at all. I really don't. So I don't have a very fun one here, except that how cool would it be if The Hermit of the Southern March was a march was a marsh wiggle?
Oh, that would be fun.
I don't think that's going to happen because we're not in that part of Narnia, but, March and Marsh sound kind of close. I know they're not the same thing at all, but that would be fun. So that's what I'm sticking with for today, because I don't have anything better to offer.
All right. I'll make a note of it.
Well, let's juxtapose what I just said and go to some people who have a lot of great things to offer. Which are some of our listeners. Was that a nice segue there?
That was a very nice
complimentary segue. Yeah. I tweeted this out. I hopped on the Twitter for the first time in quite a while to tweet out relatively recently that since releasing the first 4, maybe it was 5, but the first 4 episodes of this season, we have gotten over 30 emails and even more, not even more, but and on top of that, also quite a few voicemails as well. And one, it is really hard for us even to get through all of them, just because most of y'all that write into us write us really great, well thought out, lengthy emails, and that's like, please don't stop doing that. We really do like that. But it's not an email I can just check on my phone as I'm in the grocery store line and try to read through. But on top of that, we just don't have time to read all these on the show, and I hate that we can't. But today we are going to choose one voicemail and one email to be shared on the show. We'll actually start with the email today, and that is an email from a listener named Aaron. And Phil, should I read this, or do you want to read this?
I'd be happy to read this
Do
one.
you have it in front of us?
I have it in front of me.
Nebuchadnezzar, in quotations, may he live forever. And notes.
Those are parentheses.
Did I just say quotations?
We did.
Yep.
It's okay. I teach students English, so it's,
I was like,
it's
I
at the
teach
top of my...
grammar. That's not good. Or Nebuchadnezzar, parentheses, may he live forever, and close parentheses, comma, and notes on Narnia illustrations.
Excellent. This is from Aaron. Hi, Phil and Daniel. Thanks for your most recent podcast on The Horse and His Boy. It's a really fun twist to have Daniel be the one keeping pace and anticipating the story, although it's probably not as fun for him as it is for the rest of us. And then there's a little winky smiley face.
Emoji.
Mm-hmm. In discussing Chapter 1 of Horse and His Boy, you guys made the observation that it seemed as though the culture of Calormen was influenced by the Ottoman Empire and various Middle Eastern/East Asian cultures. There are definitely some similarities, but I'd like to offer an alternative viewpoint. In a letter to Geoffrey Bless, Lewis's publisher for the first 5 Chronicles, in April 1953, Lewis wrote, "As to realism in the new one, Miss Baines may base her ideas on Calormen culture either on the picture of the Arabian Nights world or on her picture of Babylon and Persepolis, or any mixture of the two. But their swords must be curved because it says so in the text." And that's from Lewis and Hooper.
Hooper. That's Walter Hooper.
I misspoke. Lewis and Hooper.
Thank you.
2007, page 322. I know how you feel about Baines' illustrations, although really with the lack of detail given in the Chronicles, one could argue that the only thing that can be truly considered canon is the text itself. So take this as you will. But I think this influence is also seen in the text, especially when it comes to Calormen religion and their god Tash.
That was the name of their god, Tash. Okay.
Tash.
I was saying it earlier in this episode. Okay.
I can give you more details than that right now. Spoilers. I can't give you more details than that right now. Spoilers. But overall, the flavor and spirit of Calormen culture has more in common with the ancient Philistine, Assyrian, and Babylonian empires than those in modern East Asia. When viewed that way, Calormen's place in the Narnian world is clear. Yes, if Narnia had the feelings of a romantic Arthurian legend, then Calormen would naturally be the opposite/literary foil, aka Crusader.
Oh, that word's crusader. Sorry. I know you don't study
AKA
medieval history there, but that word is crusader.
I don't think we should celebrate the Crusaders, aka Crusader era antagonists. But if Calormen is also...
say it. That's an all capitalized but.
But, like that.
Yeah, that's perfect.
Can we say that on the show?
Yeah.
But if Calormen is also influenced by the Philistine, Assyrian, Babylonian Empire, then it follows that Narnia would be the opposite/literary foil, aka the Kingdom of Israel. Much like Narnia and Calormen have been at odds for much of their history because they are opposites, so were Israel and the Philistines. Indeed, during Horse and His Boy, Narnia is experiencing a golden age under the Pevensies, whose rule set the standard for all rulers after, much like Israel's golden age under King David, whose rule set the standard for all rulers after. It is not a perfect comparison after all. It's a supposal, not an allegory, but it certainly does lend some more nuance and context to an intricate situation. This is one of the reasons why I love reading the Chronicles. No matter how many times I've read them over the years, I'm constantly finding new angles and nuances I hadn't considered before. On a lighter note, the Narnia community on Tumblr has produced some excellent memes that you should check out if you have the chance. To Narnia and the North, Aaron. Excellent.
Do you hear me clapping right there?
I do.
And yeah, sorry, it's
Hey,
getting to
Harris.
be lunchtime. It's a good thing that the the episode is almost over because my son is down here for lunch. So we're going to talk
he
about
brought
this
a book.
email and the voicemail. But I do apologize if there's any baby stuff in the back because we got a little bit more to go here. So I was me clapping over the microphone just because when we got this email, I really was floored by it. What Aaron is sharing with us here, I had not considered at all, and surprisingly, and again, I haven't done as much reading of other Lewis scholars for this season, so maybe it's out there and I just haven't found it. That's very, very likely. But everything that I've read had not brought anything up about this connection between the Calorman culture and Philistines, Assyrians, and Babylonian culture from ancient history and from the Bible. And I want to read some more. Just I might have to wait till after the season's over so I can stay away from some of these spoilers that Aaron is mentioning here. But I love the way she talked about the spirit of their culture being more in line with some of these other ancient Near East cultures that she mentioned, and the way that is their foil then would be that Narnia is not necessarily Arthurian England, but instead the kingdom of Israel. This hadn't even crossed my mind, and I really, really love this idea, and I think it makes a lot of sense to an extent, especially in that as we're in chapter 9 now. The further we've gone in this book, we've found, and we've mentioned when we find things that are a little bit harder to wrestle with, but we've also said, well, this one doesn't really line up if this is kind of this stereotype or if this is this caricature. There are some pretty significant departures if that is the case, and I'd love to read more about this idea because I am really intrigued by it. Yeah. It really is something I'd not had heard before, and I think a lot of it makes sense to me.
Yeah. I was also impressed with this, and I also think that it doesn't have to be just one influence. The beauty of fiction is you can be pulling from multiple places, and we certainly see the influence of quite a bit of Old Testament stuff, and then maybe some other stuff as well. And considering the time period he's in and what influence, like what things he may have been influenced by, that's certainly possible.
Yeah, and there are still things that are somewhat indicative of the Ottoman Empire in that we see like things like crescents, obviously the crescent being a really prominent symbol in Islam. And so there are still other things that line up, but I think if we actually took away Baines's illustrations here, they're beautiful, but if we took them away, I wonder if we would be making as strong of a connection just from the symbols of crescents or curved swords. I wonder if we'd be making more connections between, like she says, like Aaron says, the Assyrians and the Babylonians, for instance.
Yeah.
This is a great, great email. Thank you, Aaron, so much for pointing this out.
And thanks for connecting it to other works with page numbers.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah, there's a little citation here at the bottom that I really enjoy here. Well, we also have one voicemail before we go to, and I want to go ahead and play this voicemail for us.
Hey, Daniel. Hi, Phil. I'm just leaving you a voicemail from quarantine camp at basic training for the Army. I just want to let you know that you guys' podcast has really helped me get through here. There's been a lot of setbacks with my training. Hopefully I don't get too emotional here. But just like listening to you guys' podcast has really made it a lot better. And I started watching or listening when about a year, not quite a year ago, I want to say about 8 months ago, I had a sleepover in my 6-year-old brother's room. I slept on the floor, and he needed something to help him go to sleep. And so I found a podcast, and it happened to be you guys', and he fell asleep like that. And so I listened to that whole episode. I finished it. It was about the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. I don't remember if it was the first episode or if I just found one that I thought I might like. But after I listened to that, I just kept listening to them over and over again. Even though my 6-year-old brother just didn't I don't know, he just fell asleep right away. But I just continued listening to them on my own. And so you guys have given me something that let me really, really see what it's like to read these books for the first time again. Because as a kid, I read The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. I think I was only in first grade. And my mom said it was amazing. I read it. I barely understood it. I was like, Mom, this is a terrible idea. Why did you have me read this book? but I read it again a couple years later, and I loved it. Then I read The Horse and His Boy, which is kind of unorthodox, but it was the next one I could find, and I loved that one. Then I read The Magician's Nephew, also completely unorthodox. Absolutely adored that one too, because that one was really, really cool. Just all the concepts that it brings, and seeing how things happened right before The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Just something about that just like really stuck with me.
Well, that is a cool story. I love that our podcast helped somebody get through something. And I also love that it was a connection point with his younger brother. That was great.
Excuse me. His brother slept through our podcast?
The first few seconds of our podcast was a connection point.
No, I'm just kidding. That's awesome. This was a really great story to hear. I'm glad. One, thank you for your service. And I'm glad to hear that, that just kind of us goofing off here and but reading incredibly beautiful works of literature just is able to help people through different things in life. For some people, it's just to get through the morning commute. For other people, it's to, it's on a run, or it's through it at nighttime. Or it really does mean a lot to us to hear these kind of things. Podcasts for both of us, we've always mentioned, were very important and have been important.
And pretty early on point in time too.
There were podcasts that I listened to when I was like in college, and I would go to or high school, and that's what I went to sleep to. Was I would find just kind of these comforting voices of like they felt like my friends, and it's cool to be able to provide that same kind of thing for other people. And really, it all goes back. It's not us, but it goes back to just the beauty of what Lewis has created, and just this great community of people who love his works. So yeah, that was a really fun way to end this episode.
Yeah, definitely.
Phil, since you read the email, why don't I wrap us up here today? Again, we'll be back with Chapter 10 next time. But before we go, as always, this episode is made possible by our patrons over at patreon.com. If you'd like to support the show, you can listen to a bonus episode each month along with other rewards. Special thanks goes to Elias Dean, John Marr, Emily Wakefield, and Ryan Smith for supporting us at our top tiers. And all of them and the rest of our patrons are probably used to my son interjecting here like he's doing now. I feel like on all of our Dancing Lawn episodes, he finds a way to... I guess it's just what happens when we have a toddler now, is that,
It's fun because when we started this, you didn't have a kid. You kind of had a cat that hung out every now and then.
That was like a half a cat.
But now... Yeah, now you don't have a cat anymore. You have a dog.
Don't put me on blast for that. Look, we don't feed strays, but there was a cat that adopted us. It was just one cat, and we would have brought it into our house, but Anna is very, very allergic to cats, and we eventually did find an owner for that cat, and that cat is very happy. He's saying dog.
Hopefully you'll get a dog next time. I just want to point out that you paid me to go to your house for a week to feed the cat that you didn't own.
Well, I just want to point out that you forced us to pay you. I just was like, hey, could you help us? And you were like, it'll cost you $300.
You don't really need to pay me for this, but I just want you to know I fundamentally disagree with feeding this cat.
Okay. No,
I'll do it because you want me to, and I want to help out.
It was...
The best part was you said, we're only giving him a cup of food because we want to encourage him to eat elsewhere. That was the part that killed me.
We eventually found a home for him with one of my coworkers
at the farm,
and he no, don't do that. And he is happy there. I check in all the time with my coworker. How's the cat's name was Oliver? We're like, how's Oliver doing? He's doing great. He loves it there.
That's good.
So it was also the city is not a good place for him. I felt bad.
Yeah, he's more of a country cat.
Yeah, and she lives in the burbs, so it's still has a lot more land than we do. So
subdivision cat.
Yeah. So, but I don't even remember how we started talking about cat. Oh, we're talking about how my son always joins on the conversation here. But we'd had some great listener feedback today, and if you also would like to send us some feedback, we love emails and voicemails. You can email us at thenarniapodcast@gmail.com or leave us a voicemail at 406-646-6733. As always, we appreciate a review wherever you listen to this podcast because it helps other listeners find the show and join in on our read-through. Thank you for coming along on this journey, and we will be back next time with Chapter 10.